I'm going to be expelled. Please lend me the tuition money.
My grandson appeared at the door, drenched from the typhoon, and fell to his knees in the entrance, begging. He had worked hard to get into a private high school so he could pursue his love for soccer. At first, my son and his wife were against it, but by the time he enrolled, they seemed to have accepted it. They even said they'd pay for his tuition, so what could have gone wrong? All I could think about was helping my beloved grandson in his time of need. But then, my husband spoke.
No way!
Without a moment's hesitation, my husband replied, and I instinctively held back my words. Hearing this, my grandson muttered,
I knew it.
And laughed bitterly. Then, he ran off towards the railroad crossing. My name is Nancy. Since retiring, I've been living a quiet life with my husband, Jason. Our neighbors often said things like,
Nancy, now that you and Jason are finally done raising kids, you can relax.
But I had felt a bit lonely ever since our son John moved out. After graduating from university, John got a job at a large multinational company, where he also met his future wife. Thanks to that, both he and his wife had high-paying jobs, and they seemed to be living a perfect life, especially after the birth of their son, Harrison. So even though we felt lonely, I thought it was best not to interfere with their lives. My grandson joined the local youth soccer team when he was in elementary school and practiced diligently. Thanks to his efforts, he was able to get accepted into his first-choice high school on a soccer scholarship. Seeing how happy Harrison was made us all feel joyful, but the problem was that the school was private. My son said,
Private high schools are too expensive. A public school is more than enough.
John was reluctant, and his wife, Amy, opposed it for the same reason. However, my grandson was determined.
That school is famous for its soccer program. I've always wanted to go there, and getting in with a scholarship is a dream come true.
He tried repeatedly to convince his parents, and his desire to attend that school was palpable to us as well.
This scholarship is only offered to students who show real promise. I'm not a full scholar, but I'll still get some financial aid, and the tuition will be reduced a bit.
But John insisted.
Even so, a public high school would still be much cheaper.
Amy added,
That's right. We can't spend money on soccer when there's no guarantee he'll make a career out of it.
John and Amy refused to listen. Then my grandson said,
Fine, I'll use a scholarship. I'll pay it back myself in the future, so I won't be a burden to you.
His passion was clear, but most scholarships are meant to help low-income families afford education. Since John and Amy both had high incomes, it's unlikely they'd qualify. Scholarships that require repayment usually have more lenient conditions, but that would mean a heavy burden on Harrison in the future. My husband nodded gravely at my words. We had heard stories of young people who, after receiving temporary relief in the form of a loan, struggled to pay it back once they entered the workforce. This worried us. So, my husband and I decided to help Harrison as much as we could by giving him a generous gift to celebrate his acceptance. Even though we were living on a pension and not financially well off, we managed to give him $5,000 between the two of us. We handed this gift directly to Harrison and told him, Use this to help with your expenses. We trusted that he would put it to good use. Then, we also tried to persuade our son to reconsider. You both have enough income, don't you? Then at least cover the tuition for a child who's so determined to follow his dreams. With the three of us working together to persuade them, John and Amy finally, albeit reluctantly, agreed to let our grandson attend the private high school he wanted. However, John gave Harrison one condition. Since you're so determined to handle things on your own, we'll let you go. But if you show any sign of slacking off, you'll be transferred to a public school. He made this strict demand. Moreover, he secretly issued an order to us as well.
If Harrison sees you, he'll lose his focus. So while he's in high school, you are not to have any contact with him.
But surely we can at least talk on the phone?
No, that's out of the question. If I find out you've been in contact with him, he'll be expelled.
It was a harsh and unreasonable request, but my husband and I agreed, thinking it was worth it if it meant Harrison could pursue his love of soccer. Despite all the turmoil, Harrison successfully enrolled in the high school. It was difficult not being able to see our beloved grandson, or even talk to him much, but we frequently heard updates about him through John and Amy. According to John, Harrison was enjoying his high school life, and just knowing that gave us peace of mind. Even though he's only a first year and can't yet play in matches, it seems he has a good chance of becoming a regular player in the future. When he starts playing in matches, maybe we could sneak in to watch and just catch a glimpse of him without him noticing. I'm sure that would be okay. My husband and I looked forward to the day when we could see him play. However, just as Harrison, who was said to be spending all his time practicing, had finished his summer break and the new term had just begun, something unexpected happened. A typhoon had made landfall that day, with fierce rain and wind raging since morning, and it hadn't calmed down even by nightfall. Then, in the middle of the night, the doorbell suddenly rang, startling both me and my husband. When we cautiously opened the front door, we were shocked to find our grandson, completely drenched, standing there. We hurriedly brought him inside, but we never expected Harrison to come to our house, especially since we were forbidden from contacting him until he graduated. The fact that he showed up in such terrible weather made no sense, and seeing him soaked to the bone left me in a state of panic. First, let's get you inside. No, I should get a towel first. Oh, but I need to run a bath too. My thoughts were spinning, and I couldn't seem to find the right words. Before I could say anything, Harrison suddenly fell to his knees and bowed deeply.
I'm going to be expelled if I don't pay the tuition, so please lend me the money.
Ever since Harrison showed up at our door, I had been in a constant state of shock. I couldn't help but remember how John and Amy had initially opposed his attending a private high school because of the cost. I'm sure they agreed to pay the tuition in the end, even if it was conditional. What on earth is going on? Could they have broken their promise? They both have good incomes, so no matter how expensive it is, it shouldn't be that much of a burden. It would be heartbreaking to make him give up after he worked so hard to get into that school. Just as I was about to offer to cover the costs ourselves, my husband spoke up.
No!
He answered so quickly that I missed my chance to speak.
I knew it.
Harrison muttered under his breath, then suddenly burst into laughter. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was dry, almost despairing, which sent a shiver down my spine. I wanted to say something, but his strange behavior left me speechless. Before I could find the right words, Harrison abruptly stood up and dashed out into the storm. Wait, hold on. The rain and wind are terrible out there. I shouted as my grandson ran off into the storm without hesitation. I tried to stop him, but as I looked in the direction he was heading, I realized something that made my blood run cold. That's the direction of the railroad crossing, isn't it? Under normal circumstances, This wouldn't have been cause for alarm, but at that moment, I wasn't sure of his intentions or if he was even really going there. However, Harrison's behavior was clearly unusual, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something terrible might happen. My husband must have been thinking the same thing because he rushed out after Harrison with a look of panic on his face, and I quickly followed. Harrison was an athlete who got into high school on a sports scholarship, a physically fit young man. Under normal conditions, no matter how hard we tried, there was no way we could have caught up to him. But fortunately, or perhaps unfortunately, the heavy rain and wind obscured his vision and slowed him down. Thanks to this, my husband and I, who knew the area well, managed to catch up to him before he could reach the crossing.
Leave me alone already!
Harrison shouted. Listen to us. We never said we wouldn't help you at all, I replied, trying to calm him down. My husband isn't much of a talker and often struggles to express himself, but I knew better than anyone how kind-hearted he truly is. So I was certain that he had a reason for refusing Harrison earlier. We may not be as wealthy as John and Amy, but we'll do everything we can to help you, I assured him.
Talk is cheap! What you said earlier, that was your real feeling, wasn't it?
Harrison still didn't trust us. I usually stepped in to speak for my husband when necessary, but I regretted being too shocked to respond earlier.
All adults are just greedy. You probably still think of me as a kid and are going to abandon me,
He accused, his tone harsh and accusing. His words troubled me, but given the situation, there was no time to dwell on it. Let's get out of this storm before you catch a cold. We don't know what could come flying at us in this weather, and I don't want you getting hurt. Let's go back home, I suggested, trying to keep things calm. After a moment, Harrison finally agreed and followed us back without further resistance. Once inside the house, after warming up and changing out of his wet clothes, Harrison seemed to regain some composure. When we spoke again, he was much calmer and more willing to talk. He explained that he hadn't been running toward the railroad crossing after all. He had intended to go to the train station but had mistakenly gone the wrong way due to the poor visibility.
I felt betrayed when Grandpa turned me down.
Harrison confessed with a wry smile.
I just didn't want to stay here anymore, so I started heading home. But then I realized it wouldn't make any sense to go to the station.
At that moment, my husband and I suddenly realized that the trains weren't even running because of the typhoon. It hit us how overly panicked we'd been, and we couldn't help but laugh at ourselves. Still, knowing that Harrison hadn't been planning anything drastic was a huge relief. Wait, nothing's been resolved yet, I reminded myself, gathering my thoughts. It was time to talk about the tuition fees that Harrison had initially asked for. My husband explained that his refusal earlier wasn't because he didn't want to help, but because he wasn't comfortable with the idea of simply lending money for tuition. It's the parents' responsibility to cover their child's education, and with the income John and Amy had, it didn't make sense for them to be unable to pay. My husband wanted to talk to them again before deciding, but he assured Harrison that if John and Amy still refused, we would step in and pay the tuition ourselves. Hearing this, Harrison finally relaxed completely, and he said with a relieved smile,
I'm glad. I was worried you two had changed.
His earlier strange remarks made more sense now, and I asked him to explain further. What he revealed was shocking but not entirely unexpected. It became clear that the reason he had come to us so desperately, even on a day as dangerous as this one, was because of John and Amy. Once we understood the full situation, my husband and I resolved that we couldn't forgive them for what they had done. We immediately began making the necessary calls and preparing for what was to come. John and Amy showed up 3 days later. The effects of the typhoon had completely faded, but the storm they brought with them was just beginning. They barged into our home without any notice, and Amy immediately started berating me without so much as a greeting.
Nancy! Harrison is here with you, isn't he? What were you thinking? Taking him in without our permission?
Oh, hello to you too. And you're complaining after leaving your child alone to go on a trip?
What? How did you know that?
This was something I'd learned from Harrison. On the day of the typhoon, John and Amy had gone on a hot spring vacation, leaving Harrison alone at home. Of course, by high school, many kids prefer hanging out with friends over family trips, or in Harrison's case, being too busy with sports to go anywhere. But the fact that they didn't even ask for his opinion beforehand, and then, right before they left, Amy just said,
"We're going to the hot springs, so take care of the house."
After talking with us, Harrison left them a note and came to stay at our house. John and Amy, returning from their trip, must have seen the note and rushed over here in a panic.
What happened to the agreement we made?
John's angry outburst referred to the condition he had set, that we shouldn't contact Harrison under any circumstances.
Well, since you broke that agreement, we're not paying his tuition anymore.
What are you talking about? You never paid it to begin with. I was astonished at their audacity, turning the blame on us when they hadn't kept their side of the deal in the first place. It was clear that the condition they had set was just a way to silence us, so that Harrison wouldn't say anything. Unfortunately for them, we already knew everything. Let me guess, you didn't come here to bring back your son, but to reclaim your meal ticket, right? As I glared at them, my husband's piercing gaze followed, and I could see the unease in their eyes. Parents who failed to fulfill their responsibilities and instead exploited their own children had plenty of reasons to be nervous. Before Harrison's enrollment, they had assured us they would cover his tuition, but it was all a lie, something they didn't bother hiding from him. Harrison, therefore, proceeded with the scholarship application as originally planned, intending to pay his tuition that way. However, the monthly payments he was supposed to receive were being siphoned off by John and Amy. Harrison had been left confused, not knowing who was taking the money. For the first 2 months, Harrison managed to cover his tuition using the money from the gift we gave him when he enrolled, but once that ran out, he became desperate and turned to his father for help. Shockingly, our son then tried to blame us.
It must be your grandparents. Trusting them with your account details was a mistake.
Would the people who gave me enough money to pay the enrollment fee really steal from me? I can't imagine Grandpa and Grandma doing something like that.
Harrison didn't believe John's story right away. But when people hear something enough times, even if it's untrue, they might start to wonder, could it be true?
People change as they get older, for better or worse. Some become kinder, but others lose their restraint and turn for the worse.
That's right, Harrison. The grandparents you knew aren't the same anymore. You need to think about who they really are now.
Since Harrison hadn't seen us since starting high school, he couldn't make a judgment for himself. Moreover, Harrison wasn't aware of the condition John had imposed on us, so he didn't understand why we had distanced ourselves. To him, the sudden lack of communication from the grandparents who had always been so attentive seemed like proof that we had changed. You tricked Harrison into believing you and used the scholarship money meant for him for your own gain.
But Harrison wasn't even suspicious of us.
When I confronted them, revealing that we knew everything, they looked down in shame. Then, when John muttered,
How did we get caught?
Harrison caught the words and scowled in displeasure.
It's not like I fully believed you, Dad. Even after I started to doubt Grandpa and Grandma, you were still buying brand-name goods and new cars. I started to wonder if you were all in on it together.
The truth is, they earned enough to afford some luxuries, and under normal circumstances, Harrison wouldn't have thought twice about their purchases, assuming they were bought with their own money. However, when parents who forced him into attending a public high school due to financial constraints are spending money freely on themselves, it's only natural for him to grow suspicious. In reality, they had been overspending beyond their means, covering the shortfall with Harrison's scholarship funds.
And then, when you said you were going to a luxury hot spring resort, I knew something was seriously wrong. I'm sorry, but I checked your bank account, Dad.
How dare you snoop through my things?
John turned red with anger upon hearing this, but he had no right to yell. Is that something you have the right to say, after using someone else's money? Harrison has always been a good kid who never touched your things until he reached his limit. And it was your own actions that pushed him to this point. Beside me, my husband stepped forward, likely trying to shield Harrison from John's glare. John's bank statements showed that every month, on the same day Harrison's scholarship disappeared, an equivalent amount was deposited into his account. The money trail was clear as day. Worse, Harrison discovered this right after the school warned him about unpaid tuition fees.
They said I might get expelled if it didn't get paid. When I was alone at home thinking about it, I just became more and more anxious.
Harrison had confided in us weekly when we finally talked. At that time, the fierce storm outside seemed to amplify his instinctual fear. Imagine being on the brink of expulsion, not due to any fault of your own, but because of the parents you should be able to rely on. How cornered must he have felt? Even after discovering his parents were stealing from him, Harrison's suspicions about us hadn't been completely cleared. In fact, he likely feared we might have been complicit in using the money John withdrew. This suspicion was evident in the way he had accused all adults that day with his remark, "Adults are all the same." But despite his doubts, Harrison clung to a sliver of hope and came to us, drenched and desperate. You can't even begin to imagine what was going through his mind that day. I never raised you to be so heartless.
Shut up!
At this, my son, seemingly fed up with the severe reprimand, erupted in a tantrum, shouting,
If he had just gone to public school like he was supposed to, we wouldn't have had less money to begin with. What's wrong with making him make up for what we lost?
And Nancy, you keep saying we tried to pin the blame on you, but it's not exactly a lie. This mess is partly your fault anyway.
Emboldened by John's outburst, Amy's tone became surprisingly defiant, a stark contrast to the uneasy silence she had maintained earlier.
You're the ones who gave him that much gift money in the first place. That's why Harrison went ahead and handled the enrollment on his own. You messed things up, so take responsibility for it.
I tilted my head in disbelief at Amy's absurd accusation as she pointed her finger at me. How is it wrong to do everything we can for our grandson? Stop twisting logic to shift the blame. What you did was plain theft. I tried to speak calmly, reasoning with them, but my words fell on deaf ears. My son sneered, his expression mocking.
Parents using their kids' money? We're family, so it's not like we're going to face any criminal charges. Too bad for you.
And if the school's threatening to expel him, he should just quit that money pit. It's not worth it anyway.
Exactly. Let's do that.
Watching the two of them, perfectly in sync as they plotted together, made it clear that this was all part of their calculated plan. If you knew exactly what you were doing, that just makes it all the more despicable. Harrison, they're still your parents, but we're ready to go all the way, right? What I was about to say had been discussed beforehand, but I wanted to confirm it with my grandson one last time. Without hesitation, he replied,
Of course.
and beside him, my husband gave a firm nod of agreement. You're right that it might be difficult to bring criminal charges. But since Harrison has suffered damages, the law is on the side of the victim. We can simply file a civil lawsuit and claim damages. Even though there's no financial hardship, the fact that they withheld funding for his education, despite him being a minor, constitutes a clear abandonment of parental duties without just cause. Worse still, the scholarship Harrison secured on his own was misappropriated by them instead of being used for tuition. No matter how much John and Amy try to justify their actions, a third party would undoubtedly find them at fault. If Harrison, the victim, decides to sue, he could reclaim what was stolen from him. And of course, Harrison had already resolved to take his parents to court if necessary. The only ones unprepared for this were John and Amy.
Wait a minute! A lawsuit? Isn't that a bit extreme? We're family. Can't we just resolve this more peacefully?
Even in a civil case, legal fees for attorneys can add up, and it's no wonder they were against the idea, considering they only wanted to spend their income on luxuries. Moreover, if word of this lawsuit got out at work, it could ruin their professional reputations in no time.
Please, don't do this!
As parents, your father and I want to teach our son to take responsibility for his actions. And Harrison wants to continue attending his current school. So, what do you think you need to do? Amy remained silent, her lips pressed into a thin line, but John, though scowling, muttered,
You want us to pay the money back.
Correct. Well done. If you repay it, there's no need to escalate this further. Although, we've already found a lawyer, so the choice is yours. The truth is, even if they don't repay the money, there's no risk of Harrison being expelled. As soon as the typhoon passed, I contacted the school and resolved the issue. The mention of expulsion wasn't an immediate threat, but rather a potential outcome if the fees remained unpaid. The school had misunderstood the situation, assuming that despite being financially well off, we were trying to dodge the tuition fees. This led to them issuing a severe warning, which made Harrison feel like he was on the verge of being expelled. However, once I explained the situation to the school, they quickly understood. They agreed to hold off on any action until the matter with John and Amy was settled. Even in the worst-case scenario where we couldn't get them to pay, Harrison still had us to rely on. My husband and I were prepared to cut back on our own living expenses to support him. Of course, we had no intention of sharing this with John and Amy. After all, everything we did was for Harrison, and we had already decided not to forgive the two who caused all this trouble, no matter what they said. You'd better return the money that rightfully belongs to Harrison, and start paying his tuition. Otherwise, we'll be taking this to court, I firmly declared, locking eyes with the now uneasy couple. In the end, they paid back every penny they had embezzled and covered the tuition fees, even if it meant taking out loans. It seemed they were desperate to avoid a lawsuit. However, as the saying goes, news travels fast. Somehow, word got out about Harrison nearly getting expelled over unpaid tuition and about John and Amy taking on debt. Their company pays them well, so naturally, people started wondering how they could be in such financial trouble. While it hasn't been revealed that they spent Harrison's scholarship, Rumors began circulating about their extravagant spending habits and speculation about what shady things they might have been spending on. Despite the rumors, they can't afford to leave their high-paying jobs, so they continue working there, albeit with a growing sense of unease. Since then, Harrison has said,
I don't feel safe living with parents I can't trust.
and has been commuting to school from our house. He's still deeply involved in soccer, and although the training is tough, he seems full of life. Seeing him so vibrant, my husband and I are determined to protect and support him. How did you like this story? Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We'll see you in the next video.